Hi. Most people think that the Celtic religion, the devotions to the gods, was set into one specific type of polytheistic devotion. Of course, this is erroneous since there were many different schools of thought and many ways to devote to the gods, and this mainly according to the different functions to which the people of the tribe or nation belong to. So in the guest of most of the Indo-European mythological war episodes, a chief or king has the responsibility to instruct and lead warriors into battle in order to ensure the protection of the subjects he defends. And in this situation, he acts as a military officer according to the duties of the first function of teachers and instructors. These duties and responsibilities were defined and conditioned by set statutory rules. And as Georges Dumézil explained in Destiny of the Warrior, the central motif of the Indo-European tripartite ideology was one of force, protection, sovereignty, prosperity, and fecundity. The main purpose of sacred royalty is to maintain organization and capitalization in order to maintain the kingdom's balance of power and justice. But before reaching chieftainhood or kingship, the young warrior must undergo a series of ritual initiations, and this before he is to become an accomplished combatant tested in battle. This process is well described in the Irish myths through the deeds of Cuchulainn, who at a very young age travels to the frontiers of Ulster, minded to defeat the three sons of King Necta, who constantly threatens the Ulatis. So as for the religious duties, the royal heroes of the second social function partake of theology and devotion, which evidently contrasts to those of the first and third social orders. And as we should now fully understand, Indo-European society was originally structured in sets of three functional groups or classes. So according to Georges Dumézil, these social classes were broken into three legal duties, one for the warriors, one for the clerks, and another one for the producers, artisans, and commerciants or merchants. Warriors, these aspects were declined as follows: contract, law, and friendship, along with its noble feminine aspects, which included sovereignty, strength, and fecundity. So, starting from Georges Dumézil, here is an example of his book entitled Destiny of the Warriors. So as for the religious duties, the royal heroes of the second social royal function partake of theology and devotion, which, as I said, contrasts from those of the other classes. And in short, the statutory laws of the Indo-European, which included evidently the Celts, regulate the activities and civic duties of the man and woman of majority, since all those born into one or two of these three classes were under a contract and subjected to their pertaining rules and laws, and also their presence at ritual and religious ceremony. And this was referred to as Dharma in Sanskrit, or the Rita, or the law in Sanskrit. And in Celtic terms, this was termed as Dema, from the old Celtic root Dedma, and Litus, which was the equivalent to Ritus in Latin, and Rita in Sanskrit. So in short, if we were to phrase this in philosophical terms, the duties of the first social function of the clerics were those of teaching, jurisprudence, and ministering. And the duties of the second social function of the men of arms were those of tribal protection, law enforcement, and warring. And the duties of the third function, the producers, craftsmen, merchants, were those of service, labor, production, maintenance, and material application. And this generally was the ideal way to function. Of course, in certain societies, such as with the Romans and the Teutonics, or the Germanic peoples, evidently the second order was more prevalent, than the order of clerics was there to their service as chaplains, as evidence in their rites and practices. And the Greeks were a bit halfway between the Celts and the Indo-Aryans and the Balts, in that they were more, let's say, philosophically minded, but the warrior class was still very prevalent and still very influential. So in religious terms, the warrior's devotion was essentially dualistic, ritualistic, and ascetic, as opposed to the theological rationalism of the clerics, which in thought, deed, and belief was philosophically monist, transcendental, being that much different from the cults of the lower classes, which were prone to superstition, were pluralistic, polytheistic, and mystical, evidently. So there were many entities and gods to which they maintained their devotion. Cult practices were very varied, and so this was very similar to what you find in the Catholic Church. So here are the devotional aspects of the three social orders. The Noblemen, or Nemedians, a derivative of the old Celtic Nemetes, the holy, were the elite clerical class of druids, physicians, jurors, clerical filled, and bards. The first social function therefore assured protection against unseen ideological and alienating forces, so the unseen enemies. The Eulade, the men of Ulster, or the sovereigns, were of the warriors class, the Eulatis in Old Celtic, or the Fianna, or the Wicknioi in Old Celtic, were the Fenny warriors, punning with Wenoi, heroes, Wenia warband, or again Ketumanoi or Ketuwirioi in Gaelic were the warriors, and were similar in function as those of the Roman Equites and Indo-Aryan Kshatriya. The second social warrior and seigneurial function assured protection against seen and known forces, both domestic and alien. Finally, the Wekoi or Fiach in Old Irish were the crow-like sedentary dwellers, or the broges in Gaelic, country folk, were peasants, or again the techtoi were those under protection. And all of the workers and craftsmen from the manufacturing guilds, the artisans' guilds, were those having the status of andeos, that means non-divine. And as Caesar had pointed out, the two first classes, that of the clerics and warriors, were seen as godly ordered and ordained, so this sets them a bit apart from them. And then there were also the serfs, the wassoi and the captoi, the captives or war slaves. The wassoi was a general term for these people. Wassos means submitted to, which is akin to the Indo-Aryan Vaishya. And in close meaning, the meaning is very close to the Latin word plebs, plebes, which generally qualified the third social function of city people, the merchant, the producers, the laborers, the workers, the skilled workers, the manufacturers, and all these people who assured trade, production, goods and services. So following the Roman interpretation, to each order was attributed a hierarchical godly patron, Jupiter, Mars, and Mercury. And so in Celtic terms, as Julius Caesar pointed out in his Gallic war commentaries, these warrior gods were as follows. Jupiter was Tyrannus, or Ruadrofesta. Mars was Ogma, or Ogmios in Gallic, and Lugus was Lu, or Lugus in Gallic. And in light of this, Lugus, the Celtic Mercury, or Apollo, takes on the qualities of Mars, Aries, and is much closer to the Vedic Indra, who also has lordship over the other major gods of the pantheon. And as the French scholars Guillaume Vach and Leroux remarked, as the multifaceted polytechnician warlord, or Lugus transcends all of the other gods of the Celtic pantheon in this situation. So evidently, as I mentioned, there were colors that were accorded to these gods. White was the color of the first social function, red the color of the second social function, and of course black, green, blue, or yellow were the colors of the third social function. So in Old Celtic, the names of these colors went as follows: Windos, which meant white and splendid; Rudos or Kokos, red or ruddy; and Dubis, black, which was also called Glastos, blue-green; Melinos, honey yellow; Uridios, sappy green; when not Letos, lathe, gray livid. The dual function of the hero warrior, this here was broken down into two parts. This was the dualistic aspects of the function. A mystical binding power with Ogmios Trenuiros, the magical champion, the strong man; a solitary champion of the Herculean type who restores moral and ethical order. His counterpart was Nodans, or Nuada in Old Irish, was the royal protector. Protection, regulation, and redistribution were his functions. He was also called Nuada ar Getlam, the silver-handed plutocrat, who ensures right and reestablishes the kingdom after the Battle of Mahtura. So the king represents the three classes of society. He is ministered by the high druid. He commands the other aristocrats and ensures that producers, merchants, and artisans are well protected and left to work and prosper freely. Now, the theme of Aries, Mars, and the twins. This is quite interesting, and this we get right into the dualism of this war function. So the other aspect of this war god, therefore, is duplicity. You know, with the Greek Dioscuri, the twins, which accompanied Mars, or Aries in Greek. And we're also included, this duo was accompanied by Mars, of course, as I said, and who often was a solitary hero who stood alone from the others, and who got into terrible battles and did great deeds. And so, as mentioned, Julius Caesar identifies these Celtic gods, these Gallic gods, as follows, according to the Roman interpretation. First was and foremost was Mercury, then Apollo, Mars, Jupiter, and Minerva. Why Mercury, Apollo, Mars, Jupiter, Minerva? Well, as I said, Mercury, Apollo, and Mars form a trio, especially the duo Mercury and Apollo, and Jupiter and Minerva are, let's say, they ensure rulership and sovereignty. And to quote from Caesar's war commentaries, so here is the quote. In his Gaelic war commentaries, Julius Caesar identifies the major gods of the Celts as follows: Mercury, Apollo, Mars, Jupiter, and Minerva. And to quote from Caesar's Gaelic war commentaries, Book 6, chapters 17 to 18, among the gods they most worshipped Mercury. There are numerous images of him. They declare him the inventor of all arts, the guide for every road and journey, and they deem him to have the greatest influence for all money-making and traffic. After him, they set Apollo, Mars, Jupiter, and Minerva. Of these deities, they have almost the same idea as all other nations. And Apollo drives away diseases, Minerva supplies the first principles of arts and crafts, and Jupiter holds the empire of heaven while Mars controls wars. To Mars, when they have determined on a decisive battle, they dedicate as a rule whatever spoil they may take. And after a victory, they sacrifice things as they have taken. And all the other effects they gather into one place. In many states, heaps of such objects are to be seen piled up in hallowed spots. And it has and often happened that a man, in defiance of religious scruple, has dared to conceal such spoils in his house, or to remove them from their place. And the most grievous punishment with torture is ordained for such an offense. The Gauls affirm that they are all descended from a common father, dis ata, and say that this is the tradition of the Druids. For that reason, they determine all periods of time by the number, not of days, but of nights. What's interesting here is the mention of this dis pater, or dis ater in Gaelic, this father of dissolution, of destruction. He is very similar to the god Rudra or Shiva in the Vedic pantheon. In Gallic representation, Ogmios is the equivalent to the Roman Mars, of course, and the Greek Ares. In Gallic representation, Ogmios, an equivalent of the Roman Mars and Greek Ares, is most often described as a god of eloquence. He is depicted by the Gauls as tanned, bearded, an elder leading a band of captives, fettered by their tongues with golden chains, chainlets. In Indo-European sculpture, Mars was represented triple face most often, and these additional features were to the sides of his head as if they were war masks. The old Celtic name for Mars, his old Celtic names were as follows: Aros, which was a cognate to the Greek Ares. There was Tutates or Tutatis, which was in the Irish text Agma, is said to have had three names in the Irish text: Agma Girianenach, Agma Kermait, and Agma Trenfer. When not under the guise of Elkmar, which was a terrible wolf, this qualifier of Elkmar, Volkomaros, means great wolf, Volkomaros, and it brings us very close to the Scandinavian Fenrir, a hypostasis or avatar of Loki, of course. And as Dumézil explained in the Rig Vedas, the godly pair of Mitra Varuna was the allegory of Mars and seen as the oath, the contract, and the covenant. So the war god was one of eloquence, and he was truthful to his one word. And conversely, Varuna, more troublesome, was seen as the overpowered mystic, mystifying, tantric, shape-shifting magic maker. In the Celtic pantheon, these deities are identified to Lugos, the Sumus, that is, the Sumus, the righteous, and implying Lugios, the desired, he who is bound by pledges, along with Ogmios, the magical champion, the notcher of magical bonds. So according to the Quar and Man, the fitness of names, there were three godly pillars in the old Celtic war god pantheon, and these, of course, as I mentioned earlier, covered the notions of. So according to the Quer and Man, the fitness of names, there were three godly pillars in the old Irish faith, and this very archaic mythological and theological theme was hardly remembered in the myths of the other Indo-European peoples, but nevertheless has miraculously survived under the pen of the medieval Coppist monks. And in this Irish account, these three Fathad emanated from a triad of sky gods linked to the qualities of daylight. And Whitley Stokes, in his edition of the Fitness of Names, section 220, mentioned that the three Fathad were named Aendia, Trendia, and Caendia. And much of the ethos surrounding these allegorical characters is obscured in bardic wordplay, but nevertheless shines through magnificently. And for better quality, here is the entire passage following Stokes' English translation from the Irish, in which I have in part rewritten following Guillaume Vach and Leroux's version of the same text. The three Fathad were called Faux Suifi, since they were good offspring, or Fothaid, as it is written, in that they were Fotha Suith, the foundation of offspring. Fuinchi, firstborn, or Fothaid, that is Fothade, by stealth, surreptitiously, for Mach Niad, that is Macan, begat them with Fuinchi, daughter of Beni Brit, king of Britain, or Fothaid, that is from Fi, evil, and Aid, fire, because they were virulent fires destroying clans and kindred. Or Fothaid, that is Fothadi, for good thefts, as they were, since very illicit corruption is a theft. Hence it is said, as the Druids said, welcome the theft of whence the trio thus sprang. From then on, the name Fothaid stuck to them. Their names were Aendia, the good one, Trendia, the strong one, and Caendia, the fair one. Oendia was the herdsman, Trendia the charioteer, and Caendia was the one called Fothad Canaan. Fuinke bore them for Macon at one birthing. Fuinke gave birth to Andia at nightfall. The name was given to him for the luck of having no king. Trendia came at midnight. The name was given to him because of Tressa, the strength he had from the gods. And Caandia arrived in the morning. The name Caandia was given to him because of delightfulness and of the beauty of red morning light. The name Fothad Canaan was after Canaan from a hound that he had. By him also was the name Din Kahan or Maglin, or again Fothad Kainindi, for Cain, since fair and beautiful were the gods, when he was born. Fothad Erter, the moneyed, because it was his wealth that was dearest to him. As it was said, fittingly, were his possessions, his champion's bracelets, his 2 rings, his golden torque, and his horse. Fothad of the chariots, as he was named, since horses and chariots were the portion he gave to his sons. Fergus Dolus was another one of his names. From the Choir and Man, Fitness of Names. Okay, so now as Georges Dumézil very well explains in Destinies of the Warrior, then this is very important to understand in order to understand what devotion was like for the warrior's class. The warrior god, in order to accomplish the duties of his dharma, must first kill the impious father, falter, often a father, but it's a falter, or an opponent who threatens the balance and order of the cosmos. And in the Rig Veda, Indra slays Vritra, while in the second battle of Mahturad, it is Lu who kills Balor, his grandfather. And as for the Eddas, at the onset of the Ragnarok, Loki's son Fenrir, the wolf, is set loose, devouring everything with his monstrous jaws, there killing Odin, who is avenged by his son Vithar. Now this Scandinavian motif is very, very similar to what we were saying about Ogmios in the or Ogma on the Celtic side. So on the Celtic side, of course, Ogmios, the war god, is similar to Fenrir, therefore linked closely to Loki, who is a falter, a troublesome, the sinister or magical aspects of the warrior's class, while Odin is much like Nodens. He represents Unwada. He represents the clear, sovereign, ruler type aspects of the war class. The cosmic struggle for the order of the world out of chaos is also a very, very widespread theme. It's common to most of the, or probably all of the Indo-European myths, and the actors of these mythological schemes and motifs are therefore found in most of the pantheons of the Indo-Europeans and Celts in particular. And what's interesting here is this older motif which surrounding Indra and Vritra is very well defined in the Vedas and also in the early Irish myths, such as in the takings of Ireland. as with the first and second battles of Mahturid. So the myths all agree that at the onsets or outsets of the ages, an inevitable struggle must occur between the divine forces of order against those of chaos. So for the Greeks, this Titanomachy defines the Thessalian wars between the Titan demiurges and the Olympian gods. From their respective seats, the Titans on Mount Othrys and the gods of Mount Olympus struggle for the control of the cosmos. And in the final outcome, of course, Zeus leads the Olympian gods to victory by defeating the undisciplined Titans. And in the heroic age of man, another mythological battle is fought at Troy, opposing the Achaean king Menelaus and the Trojan prince Paris over the beautiful Helen, the apple of discord. So the theme, the hostage taking, was also featured in the Scandinavian Eddas. So the hostage taking, such as with Helen with the Greeks. In the Eddas, the first cosmic war fought at the start of the ages opposes the Aussies and the Vans, and these are left, their conflict is left at a stalemate when a truce is decided for an exchange of hostages. And these myths differ slightly from the Vedic and Celtic myths, but the Celtic and Vedic myths bring on something more, where there is an agreement concerning the Danavas and the Danans, Danavas being the name that the Vedic scriptures give, and Danans being the name that the Irish scriptures give to this dynasty of gods. And they therefore oppose the Danavas, oppose the other set of gods, which were the Fomorians for the Celts. And the Danavas oppose the Manavas in this battle. And the Danavas, led by Bali, opposed the Devata, led by Vamana, for the conquest and balance of power. And similarly, in the Irish myths, the second battle of Maturid is fought between the Tuatha De Danann, led by Lu, who thus defeats the Fomorian leader, King Balor, his grandfather. And so, therefore, this dualism brings on a fault of the warrior, since there is a deicide, as Dumézil explains very well in his book. And this deicide is part of the dharma and karma of the warrior. And this is very well explained in the Bhagavad Gita, where you have Arjuna questions Krishna on the value of during the battle of Kurukshetra, of opposing his Kuru nation opponents, who are mainly comprised of cousins and close of kin. And so why commit this terrible debt of karma? And then Krishna explains to Arjuna that this is the dharma of the warrior is to oppose the sinful or faulty enemy. Okay, so of course Dumézil qualifies the warrior's fault as a sin, and although indeed linked to religious considerations, because of its religious overtones, this term does not really translate well the nuances that is found in Indo-European thought and linguistics. So in my mind, the term fault is more appropriate, since it renders the Indo-European notion of courage and responsibility. And in his book, Dumézil replaces further in the book the term sin for fault or faultiness in his description of these myths. So given his strength, the first fault of the warrior is of justified and excessive violence, naturally expressed through bouts of passion. And the second fault is one of perjury, of non-respect of civic duty, and that is the citizen or the aristocrat who belongs to the tribe must present himself to sacrifice, partake in religious ceremonies, has the duty to also protect whenever is needed the other members of the nation, the society, or the city. And so failure to do so evidently becomes a fault or a sin. And the ethics code which binds the warrior to his word does not permit him to waver freely or betray his oath or commit murderous acts. So this is why when such things happen, you find the fall of the hero or the fall of the warrior. Okay, finally, the third fault is the crime of impiety, non-respect of sacred statutory laws of his class, defying gods and priests and things like that. This being that failing the gods, the crimes of rape and murder of a member of the clerical class, such as a priestess. You find this motif as well explained in the Battle of Troy, where you have this palace priestess who is overtaken by some of the Hellenic soldiers, and this brings their sort of a downfall of some kind. Okay, so of course this joins the Vedic concept of Rita, truth, which was subjected to the statutory law of Dharma and of the personal works and deeds of that were conditioned by karma. And this adherence to a set of ethical rulings was comparable to the Vedic Dharma derived from the earlier root dharma or drema, to hold, to bear, to keep, to maintain, to uphold. And the Proto-Celtic root for the Gaelic equivalent was dedma, which became dame or dem or dema. Another French scholar, Émile Bénéviste, he lived around born in 1902, died in 1976. He clarified Dumézil's notion of tripartition, describing the role of dualism in Indo-European thought, that the divine is qualified by light, is positively charged, and all of which is not orderly, which is disorderly and destructive, therefore unproductive, unholy, unhealthy, and death-inducing, finally brings the fall of the rule or of the kingdom, and the faulty ruler must be replaced by a good ruler who brings prosperity and balance and peace. And this sacred godly order of Dharma, although non-dogmatic, is organized and maintained through a set of detailed legal and moral codes. The names also has derivatives in other Indo-European languages, which include Old Greek, Old Persian, and these names I mentioned, the Old Baltic, Darna, Derma, Derna, is very close to the Old Celtic. So this is what was termed a law of Manu in the Vedas. There was a Latin pun which played on vir, man, ver, springs, sacrum, which consecrates to the gods everything that comes, veritas, truth, and all that is truthful, sincere, honest, and true to life, true to reality, reality of the ethical order. This ethical rule was also found in the Meditations and the Stoic philosophical works of the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, which went as follows: waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be one. Just about sums it. So in Roman society, the vir, the free man, the citizen, played an important role in the city. He was thus sworn and legally bonded as a person, a personality, and a husband and father, and a pious man. The pious man is faithful to his home, his temple, He's dutiful. He fulfills all of his responsibilities towards his household, his wife, his children, and his parents, as well as his sworn commitments to the gods and to the Republic, as in Rome. At the time of the Emperor Augustus, Roman piety, the pietas, was expressed by the pious vir, which was the devotion of one who showed fidelity to the family and to the people of Rome, the tota Roma. Therefore, the pious vir was one who acted alongside the gods. Okay, so this was also the case for the other Indo-European societies. Okay, and now finally, one of the last themes that I want to touch upon for the devotion of the warriors class is the warriors Geis. Geis is the old Irish name for a taboo, an injunction, an interdiction. Okay, so the young warrior Setanta, which means the path walker, becomes Cuchulainn after he had killed the smith's dog, and he therefore takes on the name Culantios in Old Irish, Old Gaelic, I mean. That is a dog of Culann. And this Culann is more than just your typical third function smith. He is a god, of course, since he is the smith god, the same as Gobnew in Old Irish, or Gobanios in Old Brittonic, who is Hephaestus in Greek, who is the god of a god of the underworld. And of course, this dog is no ordinary dog. He's a Cerber or Kerber, which is the guardian of the gates of hell, of course. And so this Cuchulainn, he becomes the guardian of the gates of hell by killing this dog. And so in doing so, his destiny, he as a hero is destined for a very short life, even though he is a demigod and he could be almost eternal. So this Cuchulainn commits all sorts of different faults, which finally attract him a very terrible death, which quite resembles that of Odin's, where he is tied to a pillar stone by the goddess Morriganna, Morrigu, and he is bitten by a water dog, you see, because the otter is the Celtic name for the otter was Dobarcú, which was a water dog. And so, being that there is a Geist with dogs attached to him, this makes him much more vulnerable. And so, as a raven, Morrigu, there's this goddess of sovereignty. This Morrigu is part of the goddesses of sovereignty. This Morrigu is transformed as the Bab or Badua in Old Gaelic, which is the raven, and the raven pecks the eye out of Odin, also pecks the eye out of Cuchulainn, and this is how Cuchulainn's terrible death is met. So this motif is a typical war hero type of death through the Geist, through the gestas of the warrior. Okay, so next I'll touch upon the members of the warriors class. Here is the list. The members of the warriors class, these included what the Romans called the class of the equites, which the Gauls called Cabur Tarioi, or in Old Irish, the Poredioi, the horsemen or knights or cavaliers, and their officers, Tigernoi, were also called Velates or Ulates, as it was in Old Gaelic. So ruling over the vassals who were called the Wasoi. There were also the Bactoi, the emissaries, the Cateroi, the troopers, and the Rakates, the front line soldiers, and the Kinges, the foot soldiers. Thus the name Vercingetorix, for king of the foot soldiers. Thus Rix was the name for king, similar in name to the function of the Roman Rex. The Gothic Reiki, or the Indo-Aryan Raj. The noblemen, the Keltoi, were also called the Boarioi, which were freemen and cattle owners. Not unlike their Germanic cousins, such as the Vikings, they also practiced commerce, and this was well reported by the classical commentators at the time of the pre-conquest independent Gaul. So what I suggest is that if you want to know a bit more about the duties of the warrior in Celtic society, read the Testament of Moran, which you can find online quite easily. And there's a good version translated by Fergus Kelly. But if you want to download my text, my complete text on academia.edu, you can do so, and in it are all of these excerpts from the different books that I have mentioned: Bhagavad Gita, the Testament of Moran, and the Rig Veda, and much more. So if you want to, you can download it, and I'll leave you the link below, and you can freely go on Academia and look into it. And also, if you want to know the different etymologies for the different names for the Celtic Mars or the Celtic Mercury, I also have this in the article. So if you enjoyed the video, ring the bell or give a thumbs up, and we'll meet you next time.